Hello, everyone. Hi, Kevin.
Hey, what's up?
All right, guys. So I brought Kevin on today as a guest because he's starting to go through the process of thinking about buying a home in the DC area. I thought Virginia, but it turns out I think he's going to be looking in DC, which is exciting. Uh, so Kevin and I go way back. We have purposely called each other the wrong pronunciation of our last names for over a decade. We have exchanged many a Chappelle Show quote throughout the years, and I am sure, is going to be a wonderful guest today. And he graciously agreed to do this episode with me, and I'm very excited. So, Kevin, thank you so much for coming on.
Well, Allison, or AKA Ski Mecca, thanks so much for, having me because I do have several questions.
Cool.
And I'll just, fire them off.
Good. Well, so just so everybody knows, so before this episode, because it is about the most searched questions, I of course researched what the most frequently asked questions are. And I wasn't totally surprised because I get these questions proposed to me all the time. And then I did send them to you, and I told you to add any more that you wanted, or if you really didn't have that question, we didn't have to ask it. So yeah, we did do a little bit of prep for this, but like I said, I'm not that much on my end because I know the answers to these things. So
Awesome.
why don't we go right ahead?
Well, first question I got is when is the best time to buy a home?
All right. So really, I'd say it's whenever you need to buy a home, but that's not what people are looking for. I think they're looking for time of year usually. And I think a lot of people have heard that spring is the best time to buy. And the reason is because that typically is when more movement is happening on the market, when more people are listing their homes. But what that means is there's lots of people who are also looking to buy at the same time, which means you could have an increased amount of competition. So we'll talk about some of those things later, but if you're not really willing to compete and do some of the things it might take to win against other people, that might not be the best time for you. Make sense?
Yeah.
So, but then on the flip side, so like December's kind of a crazy time for most people. It's busy, you've got parties, and if your parties, holidays, lots of time with family and friends usually. The weather's not great. So if you are listing a home, it's not going to have as much curb appeal typically. But what I found is people who need to list in, say, December, they need to sell their house. Usually it's some kind of thing that's like they have to sell. That's why they've picked selling the house in a time that's not ideal. So what that could mean is you don't have as many people looking. You're dealing with a seller who needs to sell. So that might help you actually get a lower price or be able to get your terms that you want. So like I said, so it kind of depends on how you view it.
Nice. So as somebody who's been a lifelong renter, I have a question on how many homes should I view? Because I'm thinking, well, I found a home, I just want to view one. But how many homes do you think I should view or somebody should view?
Actually, I kind of agree with you. So the thing is, like, I don't think there's a magic number. I had a client, we went out for the first time and we saw four houses, and she really liked the first one. And the only reason why we didn't offer was because offers were due like 4 hours later. And that would have been a little bit much for her to get everything together in that period of time. But for me, I had to move when I was renting the first time I purchased. It was kind of a gross situation. There's an infestment of roaches, and I was like, I need to get out of here. And actually,
Mm,
it was in December. And I went and saw four places, and I ended up buying the first one I saw. So it's your bandwidth, it's what's comfortable for you. And so, yeah, no magic number.
okay. Well, you're a real estate agent, as everybody knows who listens to
Mhm.
this. How does my agent get paid when I'm going through this process?
So as a buyer, you're not paying anything to your agent. So the commission comes from the seller side. So the commission is negotiated potentially with the seller, and the listing agent is the one who decides how much of that is going to go to the buyer's agent. So typically in DC, a full commission for both parties is 6%, 5 to 6%. And hopefully listing agents split it evenly. I have seen an uneven split, which is not really my thing, but yeah, that's typically how it works.
Yeah, okay.
Mhm.
They're just out there trying to get that dough. Um, how long how long does it take? Will it take to buy a home?
Well, it depends on a bunch of factors like time of year, what the market is like. So, is it a crazy strong market? Is it a seller's or is it a buyer's market? How fast are you ready to move? How aggressive are you willing to be? Like some people will find it on day one, like we said, right? So, if you find the place on day one, then you're obviously going to take much less time than the person who wants to. I've had people look for up to a year. So, or really more than a year. So, it's going to depend on you again.
Okay. And then from that, let's say I found the place and they accepted, how long will it take for an offer being accepted to when I close? Like, what's that process like?
So in the DC area, it's usually 30 days or less. So by the time a contract is everything's agreed upon or ratified, which I think I'm going to answer what that word is in a minute. But once it's ratified and then you're signing the papers to close and own that house, it's 30 days or less.
I mean, you just used the word. What is ratification?
Ratification is when both sides, so the seller or sellers and buyer or buyers, agree to all of the terms. So when you write an offer, they don't have to necessarily accept it right away. But if they did, for example, we literally write a ratification date on that contract, and that's the day that everything starts. Day one for your contingencies, which we'll get to in a little bit. Day one is the following day,
Okay, so it's like a handshake agreement type of thing.
or a legal binding contract on paper.
Oh, nice. Even better. Well, I don't really like rejection. So what if they reject my offer?
So, okay, so what we were saying, so you write an offer, and the seller can just go, oh my God, great offer, yes, and we ratify. The seller can go, this is totally abysmal, I'm just flat out rejecting it. But I don't see that in this area very often. What ends up happening is that there's a counter. So the seller will say, okay, you need to come up in X price, or I don't like these terms you gave me, so I want them to be Y. And so it infrequently is just outright rejected. So what you basically can do is you can keep coming back to the table until and revising it until everybody agrees. So sometimes you can't agree, right? Like sometimes they're like, listen, we want full price. And you're like, I'm not comfortable with that price or I can't afford it, whatever. Then it just basically doesn't go anywhere. It kind of dies. But yeah, so I would say rejection is not the end of the world as long as they're willing to play ball and keep talking about it.
Mm. So, what's a contingent offer?
Okay. We've just for everybody to know, we've done specific episodes on a lot of this. So I'm giving really short answers, but I can always give people the different episodes to listen to if they want a more robust answer. But contingencies are basically the ability for you to walk away as a buyer. They are conditions that must be met for the contract to continue going on. So the most common ones are home inspection, appraisal, and financing. And so if one of those things doesn't work out, you can walk away legally from that purchase as a buyer. Now, in this kind of seller's market, they don't want any contingencies. Obviously, the buyer does. So that's where a lot of the negotiating comes in.
Okay. Um, well, as you know, again, lifelong renter, so I'd probably be uber excited to get into a house. But what if I get into the house, like they accept the offer, contingency, blah blah blah, but I get into this house and then we find something's wrong? Am I you're like beholden to buying it then?
So there's a difference between like getting cold feet, right? And actually wanting to walk away from a listing or a purchase because it's a lemon, right? Like I think no buyer, first time or not, wants to walk into a house that they at least didn't know in the beginning has major problems or even minor problems. So the way we get around that is by doing a home inspection. And if you were to find things that are wrong with the home, you usually can either walk away or again, you can negotiate. So you can say, listen, there are these 10 things that are wrong. We don't feel comfortable dealing with them. And that's when the seller has the opportunity to respond. So it's another time where you get to negotiate back and forth. So ratification was when you initially agree on those terms. And every contingency, you have to agree along the way that everybody is solid in that step.
This sounds like a lot, but it sounds pretty straightforward. But should I have a home inspection?
There are very few times I tell people not to have a home inspection. The issue with not having one is that obviously you don't know what's going on in the home. So if you don't have one, then you have to be willing to accept whatever there is. So if there's like a complete gut tear down, I mean, who cares about having a home inspection? You know, you're going to be gutting the whole thing. If you are a very comfortable home buyer and you're just willing to put money in to whatever needs to get fixed, that's fine. And sometimes a seller will do an inspection before they list and they'll provide that for you. So that's another reason where you maybe don't need to have a home inspection. But I mean, the home inspection is just a snapshot in time anyway, so it might not necessarily tell you something that's happening behind the walls because no inspector has x-ray vision, but it might help you feel like you're hedging your bets. So if it's a very competitive situation, and again, we talk about this in another episode, you can do a pre-inspection. So before you actually offer, you know exactly what you're getting yourself into.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And they'll nice. I didn't. I mean, I don't know anything about the process, but it'd be interesting to see like what kind of games or psychology gets done in these things.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems like it's pretty
Mm-hmm.
straightforward. But I like these questions because this is like a big barrier to entry for most people, which is the money part. So, what is an appraisal and how is it evaluated?
So an appraisal usually is requested from the bank because a bank is lending you money and they want to make sure that what they're lending you is makes sense for the actual house, that the house is actually kind of worth that. So the appraisal price is an appraiser who has a license to do appraising will go and look at comps in the area in the last 6 months, almost always, to see if the price of your home that you're under contract in matches with some of the other, again, comps. So I would say appraisals are not always accurate because unless they've gone inside of all of those homes, they can't appropriately and completely compare those houses. So we're lucky in the DC area. Usually appraisals come out where they need to. I had exceptionally low appraisal this year, which I talked about in another episode. It's not great when that happens, but there's things that you can try to do to get around it.
Okay. So then, what is earnest money?
So when you write an offer, a lot of people don't know this one, and this is honestly one of the ones I forget to talk about the most. So earnest money is when you're writing that initial contract, you're showing them how interested you are by putting money on the line. So let's say you put $30,000 as an earnest money deposit. What you're saying is, if I get through all my contingencies and we agree on all of them, and there's 5 days left to close, and for whatever reason I don't close, I don't purchase, you're going to lose that $30,000. So there are people who will put down large amounts of money to show their interest. And that's something you can do. And that money does apply towards your down payment. So I've had people put almost their entire down payment into that. And it just all gets dealt with at the end during your closing on the big closing statement you have.
Okay. So then, what should my down payment be for a house?
So,
Like how
sure,
much?
some of these questions should be answered by a lender, but everybody thinks it should be 20%, and it doesn't have to be. It really depends on what's happening in the market, which is why this is more of a lender question. Anybody who's been following what's been going on over the last, year and a half knows that things have really changed a lot. So, 20% is always great. If you can do more, that's excellent, but it's not necessary.
Okay. I mean, how much? I've been spending all this money. I thought I was doing it on down payment. How much am I going to be paying in closing costs?
So closing costs are another question that you're going to want to ask both the lender and the title company. And there are calculators that you can do to try to figure out approximately what they're going to be. But jurisdictionally and the timeline you're on, it is going to affect those closing costs because you're going to be dealing with prorations. So if somebody's already paid property taxes, and you basically have to pay the seller back for the time when you're going to own it during that period of time. If you're closing early in the month versus later in the month, your closing costs are going to be different. There are new loan fees. So if you're a buyer, you're going to deal with the appraisal cost, a credit report. You're going to have to deal with whatever fees that the lender charges you. Title charges, we'll talk about title in a little bit, government recording and transfer taxes. So some of these are set in stone and some of them are going to waffle and change. I usually tell buyers it's about 3%. It can be a little bit more, but that's kind of a general rule of thumb.
Ask away, Alison.
Okay. How can I save money when I'm trying to buy a home?
So there's a couple of different things you can do. So you can shop your mortgage and try to get the best cost. So ask about the costs, not just the rate. People focus on the rate. But sometimes, for example, they're like a credit union, they give you a great rate, but their fees are actually a lot higher. So make sure you're really getting the full picture. You can buy your rate down. You can ask the seller to pay closing costs. That's something you're probably not going to do in a super competitive situation. But if a place has been listed for 2-3 weeks, it might be something you can ask them to do. Like I said before, you can use the seller's inspection if they give you one. So that could save you, $600-800. Sometimes you can get an appraisal waiver. So the lender actually doesn't require it. It's just based on the home price, how much money you're putting down. And that saves you like $500 to $700 if you can get the waiver. And then another one that I didn't actually think of until I spoke with the lender recently is shop your insurance. Shop around the insurance. Maybe if you can bundle it with your car and something else, it'll be significantly cheaper.
Okay. So insurance for the home, but like, what is title insurance?
So title insurance, it's a policy. It's meant to protect buyers and the mortgage lenders for any kind of defects and financial losses that are because of a bad title. And what that means is like if there's outstanding liens, back taxes, if there's conflicting wills, that is something that could make a title bad. And so it's trying to make sure that you're insuring against that. And so that nobody else can have a legal claim to the property that you just purchased.
Nice. Those are all the questions I really got. And this has been great because it has been a daunting type of intimidating type of thing to think about owning a home, even though I know that's like the ultimate goal in the American dream and all that good thing. So thanks a lot, Ski Man.
Of course, Nama. Okay, guys, I'll be back in 2 seconds with guest number 2. Okie dokie. I'm back with my second guest, who is a seller and happens to be my dad. Hi, Dad.
Hi, Allie. How are you?
I'm good.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, this is exciting. Okay, so for the listeners, if you listen to this podcast regularly, you may have heard me talk about how I'm always keeping an eye out for like intergenerational homes down in the area because in case my parents want to move down here, I guess I'd consider living with my mom and dad. No, I would, Dad. But of course, first and foremost, they would have to sell or they'd want to at least start the process of selling their home. Now they are in upstate New York, just so you guys know, but the questions sellers have are almost exactly the same no matter where they are. But some of my answers might be different than what he's going to need to know up there. So today we're just going to pretend that my parents are selling a house somewhere in the DMV and kind of same thing with the buyer questions. I researched what the most commonly asked questions were. I sent them to my father and he added others that he had, and we're going to answer them today. So thanks again, Dad. Get started when you're ready.
Okay. Well, Allie, when is the best time to sell a home?
So I started and really answered this question on the other end too for the buyer questions. So there really isn't a best time to sell. I think the first question is, when do you have to sell? If there's some kind of thing that comes up in your life and you have to sell in what has traditionally been called like a bad time, then you just need to do it. What could end up happening is that you might end up having to negotiate a little bit more because you don't have as many buyers who might be competing for your house. Traditionally, people will tell you the spring because the spring is when more people are looking to move potentially, especially in certain areas like where you live, and there are applicable areas down here. If kids are in school, then people are usually going to try to wait towards the end of the school year and want to move over the summer. So as a seller, probably sometime in the spring to summer, but again, you can really have a good sale any time of the year.
Okay, thanks. How long will it take to sell my home?
Well, it's going to come down to a couple of factors. How you price it, I think, is the most important one because there are people who want to price higher than it might be suggested by a realtor, and we'll get to pricing in a little bit. But if you saw that Bob's house sold for $500,000 and you want to sell your house for $500,000, the question would be, when did Bob sell? And is your house comparable to Bob's house? So sometimes people just get an idea of what they should sell for. And when it's too high, that's going to make your house sit on the market longer. Also, updates to your house can make a huge difference as to how quickly it sells. People are usually more interested in buying a house that's done, and specific rooms are done, and we'll get to that in a few. But yeah, so it's going to depend mainly on those two things.
I hear in this market a lot of houses are being sold for much more than the asking price. Is that typical? And is that going to depend on any other factors?
It depends on a lot of what we just said, right? So if you have a fairly priced home, that's what I would call it. It's like not obscenely high. And it's obviously, if it's really low, then yeah, you're going to get a bunch of offers and it would go over that price that you set. But if it's really, really low, then it's probably going to end up selling for, what I normally would have priced it for anyway. But yeah, it's because generally speaking, there is not enough inventory. And so people are trying to compete to get something where they want. And even right now, with rates being higher, people are hoping, kind of assuming, but hoping that they're going to be able to refinance down the road.
Okay. I think you answered part of this, but what should the list price of my house be, and how do realtors assess a home's value?
So, if you're talking to me about how I would price your home, what I do as a realtor is I look at the comps. And so there are comps that you can just look at and see the address. You can see if the taxes are similar based on where they are, which, what just general area and the size of the house. So bedrooms are the same, bathrooms are the same in a house. But the thing is, what I'm doing is I'm looking at every photo in the MLS to see, well, what was that kitchen like? If that kitchen and all those bathrooms are redone and the floors are redone and everything's new, even if it's 5 bedrooms in that house and 5 bedrooms in your house, but your house, for example, is not updated, that's not going to be priced the same. So you really, as a realtor, should take a holistic look at everything, both outside and inside, and the address to get that value. Now, there's always going to be a range, right? Very infrequently are you going to have an exact number. Your house is worth $500,000. So what I do personally is if it's on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the absolute highest, 1 being the absolute lowest, I usually price it around a 6 because the market will push that price up where it needs to be. And if it's lower and it's more competitive, then you're likely just to get a more advantageous offer from the seller's perspective.
Makes sense. Why is my home's appraised value different from the market value and possibly different from tax assessment value too?
Yeah, this is a good question and it can be very confusing. So the tax assessment value is the slowest because the cap is how much it can grow via the homestead exemption. So it's always much lower than the fair market value. And that's okay because it means you're going to be taxed less. So which is something that we are always happy about. But it's really just taking into account very simple factors. It's basically a drive-by assessment is what you can kind of think it as. Now, a bank appraisal is something that's done by the buyer's lender. Typically, you can get an appraisal otherwise if you want. But that is a little bit more robust where the appraiser is going to look at comps in the market. But unlike what I just described, I do to price a home, they aren't comparing literally every single detail of that house. I'm looking at, do you have Bosch appliances or do you have GE appliances? Do you have you put in something that has extra value versus something that is not quite as valuable? So your bank appraisal is hopefully going to be around the price you sell it for. Because as a seller, if there's an appraisal contingency and the price of the appraisal comes in lower than the sale price, that can affect your sale. That can affect the negotiating that happens down the road. And then the fair market value is based on all the things I just said. So that's what I would say I do is a fair market value. And then of course, what it ends up selling for is also technically a fair market value because it's what the market has put the price of the home at.
Okay. What do I really need to do to get my house ready for sale?
We've talked about this one, right? I feel like ad nauseum when I go home. So like I said, so it kind of depends what your interest is. Do you want to sell it quickly? Then maybe you just don't have to do a lot. This is not the case of your house, but if your house needs so much work and it hasn't been taken care of, maybe you don't do a lot because somebody knows they're just buying a house and needs a ton of work. Maybe they're going to completely gut it and renovate it. But if you want to sell it for top dollar, the things I suggest people do are obviously declutter, always paint. So fresh coat of paint goes a long way. Making sure it's not too opinionated, so more neutral colors. And then kitchens and bathrooms being updated are a massive value add. I fully and wholeheartedly believe in staging. Everybody thinks that their furniture is great because they love it, it's their style, but it's not necessarily the style for everybody else. So I would always stage and curb appeal. I mean, no problem with your house. Lots of flowers, green grass, things like that are going to be a huge sale for your particular house. Anything that you can do to make people wowed before they even walk in the door is something you should try to do when you're getting your home ready for sale.
So you mentioned a point like my house have a lot of flowers and greenery. Should I be taking pictures when it's at peak performance so the day I sell it, you'll have them?
Well, so photos are something that is done by the realtor down here. They pay for all of the marketing. So you could do that. You don't want people to feel like they've been hoodwinked, right? But I mean, if those flowers and those bushes exist there all the time, it's okay to throw that photo in. But the thing is, you do want it to be professional. So that would probably mean that you're bringing the photographer in twice, which is something you definitely want to discuss with your realtor.
Okay, well, I'm thinking like if I sell my house in the winter, photographer's not going to be able to take pictures of my flowers, that are peaking during the summer.
It's true. Yep.
Are real estate commissions negotiable?
They are. So down here, so as I talked about in the buyer's questions, the commission for both the agents, the buyer's and the seller's agent, come from the seller. There is a full commission that is set by the seller, and then the listing agent decides what proportion of that the buyer's agent gets. It kind of starts at 6% here in this area, and some people will go down to 5%. And there are some discount brokerages that go way lower. But the thing is, I think personally, you pay for what you get. When I am doing a 6% commission, I'm coming in and telling you exactly how to curate your house. I'm working with everybody who needs to come in and coordinating. So I think it ends up coming back to you in the sale of your house, which is why I believe it legitimizes the full 6% commission.
So I can't always make them an offer they can't refuse.
Ha 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 ha.
How much does a seller pay in closing costs?
So this one is a little bit hard to answer on both ends because it depends on a lot of different factors as far as like, have you paid your taxes yet? So you're going to get prorations back from that. The transfer taxes, depending on where you are, you don't have a lot of fees for, you don't have a loan, right? So you're not paying any lender fees. So what I tell sellers down here is typically it's about 7%, and that's looping in the commission.
Okay. All right. And my final question is, can I just sell my own house in a seller's market?
I mean, you can, but then you're missing out on all of the things I just described that I can do for you. So if I really can help you get more money, so let's say we put $20,000 in your house to get it ready, and that means you sell it for $50,000 more. That's a service I've given you that helps you net an additional, $30,000 minus the commission. But my point is, it ends up being somebody who can lead you through the process. To be honest, I've never worked with somebody who sold their own home, obviously, so I don't know where things can get complicated, but I would think you would have to pull somebody in at some point to at least help you with the contract and make sure that everything is done legally, because the last thing you want is to not properly sell your home from the legal perspective.
My last point is that if you were to be my real estate agent, I know you would answer all my phone calls.
Mm-hmm.
But if you weren't my daughter, who I love so much anyway, how responsive are you to your clients? For instance, when I worked and I was supervised the staff, everyone was told they had to answer every phone call within 24 hours. And in this market, I can't tell you how many times I've called up a plumber or an electrician or a landscaper, and they never return your phone calls. And it's very aggravating. So how responsive are you to your clients?
Well, I think the bigger question is, as a seller, how responsive should your real estate agent be, and should you assess that before you put your house in the market? Absolutely. Every agent is different. Personally, I think being available almost always is really necessary. Things move very fast. And so you often have to react very fast. Waiting to get back to an offer, for example, for 24 hours is not acceptable in the real estate world. But likewise, you should be answering those questions yourself as a seller. How responsive are you going to be? Because I can only go as fast as my seller can go.
Well, this has been a lovely exchange of ideas. You've been very helpful, and you look very enchanting today, by the way.
Thanks, Dad. All right, guys. Well, everyone, I hope you enjoyed these question and answer sessions. If you have any additional questions, of course, you can always drop me a line, let me know, and I'm happy to answer them. Dad, thanks again for coming on.
Thank you.